Hairpin lace is one of the most beautiful and interesting techniques that you'll ever find out there. It's certainly the most interesting thing that I have ever learned in crochet, and every time I revisit this technique, I get more and more excited about the possibilities and the types of projects that you can make with hairpin lace. Now, hairpin lace has been around for years and years, but it's getting harder and harder to find good resources on how to do this, projects that you can make, ways to join, troubleshooting, just regular tips and tricks for hairpin lace. And I hope to change just a little bit of that, starting with this video. If you've ever been curious about hairpin lace, or maybe you're just hearing about it for the first time, well, this is the place to start. I want to share basic information on hairpin lace, what you need to know to get started, the tools, how to get things set up, and just a few steps to get things going. Now, the real secret with hairpin lace is it's so incredibly easy. So don't let the look of it, the intricacy of it, scare you off, because I can guarantee you can do this form of crochet with just a little bit of steps that I want to share with you in this video. Now, early hairpin lace was actually crocheted on hairpins, and that's where the name comes from, but modern day crocheters are using a hairpin lace loom that looks something like this. There's all types of looms out there, different shapes, different sizes, but they all generally look sort of like this. You'll have a frame on either end, and you'll have two, long pieces in between. All of the looms that I have seen allow these little stoppers to come off at both ends. I'm not sure if that's the case for every single loom out there, but at least one of them will be removable so that you can put the yarn on and get the braid started, and of course remove the braid when you're done. I've had this loom in my collection for a really long time now at this point, so if this one is still available, I will link it in the description below. However, you can use any hairpin lace loom that fits your budget, that you're able to find, or that you just like the look of. You can, of course, always find something like this on Amazon. You can maybe walk into your local craft store and be able to find a hairpin lace loom, although this is a little bit more niche of a tool, so you may or may not find that just in the store. You may actually have to purchase it online. So no matter how you like to shop, if you like the convenience of Amazon, you like to shop online at some of your craft stores, maybe try walking into a craft store, or if you like to support small businesses and local designers, you can always check Etsy to see if you can find a hairpin loom that has been handmade, maybe with like a wooden frame or something like that. So this is the loom and the primary tool that you need for hairpin lace. And by the way, you'll hear me call this a frame or a loom. I'm talking about the same thing. You can use the two terms interchangeably. Now, aside from the loom, the only other thing you need for hairpin lace is probably stuff you already have. You'll want some yarn, of course. I typically like to suggest a worsted weight or a medium weight yarn, something that's smooth in texture, just, so it's easy for you to see the stitches, see the loops, and, be able to work with. And you'll also need a crochet hook, which I'm sure you already have in your collection, a pair of scissors, and then some scrap yarn for guides. Stick with a hook that coordinates with the yarn that you're using. I'm going to be using a DK weight yarn, so I have a 4.5mm crochet hook to work with this particular yarn. But if you're using, medium weight yarn, you might try a 5 or a 5.5. Now, if you are following a pattern, of course, you'll always want to use the hook size that's recommended for the pattern or the hook size that gives you the proper gauge. But for just a little practice swatch and braid that we're going to be working with here, just pick a hook that you're comfortable using that works well with the yarn that you have on hand. When you get your loom, the first thing you'll notice is that the frame on the top and the bottom will have different placements for you to insert the prongs, and that's so you can create strips of different widths. So this one, if I flip it over, you'll see I have all these holes in order to place the prongs in them so that I can adjust the width of each strip. And it's project dependent, pattern dependent. You'll always want to follow your pattern, or if you're coming up with a project on your own, you'll want to measure and see that you have the proper width for your strips. That's way more advanced than we're going to talk about, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. So if you want to follow along with me and create a swatch that's exactly the same as mine, by the way, you totally don't have to. You can set the width of the prongs to whatever is comfortable for you, whatever you want to play around with. But the most important thing to note here is that you can change the width of the prongs, and that changes the width of your braid, and therefore would play around with the size of the project. So there's a couple different ways that you can measure your frame to set it up for the right size. You can go ahead and assemble it and place a ruler just right on top, and I'll know that this placement here is 3 inches, which is actually what I want to do for this swatch. But just play around with the holes that you have available in your frame. If you need a skinnier width or you want a wider width, just play around with it until you find a setting that works for you. Although there are a couple different ways to crochet a hairpin lace strip, or sometimes called a braid, most patterns will call for the basic braid. And the difference in patterns typically happens within the joins. So I'm going to show you how to crochet a basic braid, and this is what that looks like. This is what we'll crochet for this little swatch that we're working on, and I've actually already got a few of them finished. A couple of things you'll notice about this little piece of work right here is, one, we have a braid in the center, and that's, I guess, kind of where the term comes from. We have our basic braid here, and we have loops at either end. Now those loops right now are secured with guide yarn. That's this like darker yarn here. And guide yarn is one of those things that you absolutely want to use it, because if you don't, you'll learn the hard way that these loops like to twist and tangle, and it just makes your life a lot more of a headache when you go to join these later. So I'll show you how to use guide yarn when you're working directly on your loom, so it's not like anything extra that you have to do, just a little bit in the setup process. Now typically at the end where the guide yarn is a loop, that's usually your starting edge, which isn't super important right now just for making a swatch and learning the basics, but it usually is very important for patterns. So if this is the starting edge, then this down here with the knot is the finishing edge. So we're going to make one of these strips using the same yarn. By the way, if you're curious about this yarn, it is a discontinued yarn that came from a past knit crate, so unfortunately it is not available for me to link to. But just find something that you really like to work with that's smooth and easy to use. Now for your first time, as you're setting all of this up, I kind of went back and forth about whether I wanted to show you how to start it with a guide yarn versus without a guide yarn, just so you can see that together it's just slightly more fiddly, but using guide yarn is such a good idea and it's something I would highly recommend. So even though it's a little bit more to hold on to and think about when you're setting up your loom for the very first time, it's worth learning. Just bear with me. It does get a lot easier. So joining the yarn to your loom is really simple. You'll make a slip knot just like you're used to doing, but you'll make this slip knot a little bit bigger than normal. Now since I'm a right-handed crocheter, I'm going to place the slip knot loop on this prong here, which becomes my home prong. If you're left-handed, you'll just reverse that. You'll place your slip knot on the opposite side. So the strips that we're using, or that we're going to be making, are about 11 inches long. Now you don't have to make them that long. You can certainly make them half that long because you're kind of just getting started and learning the principles of this. But the reason why I mention that, and the reason why that would be important, is because your guide yarn needs to be a little bit more than double the length, the total length of the braid that you're making. Your pattern will usually tell you how long each strip is, and then it'll help you in figuring out how long to make your guide yarn. Something that is a contrast color I find is really helpful, so I'm using this like much darker purple bluish yarn, and also something that's relatively smooth. Now this is not a smooth yarn, and it's probably not what I would recommend necessarily as your first guide yarn, but it's what I have available that's in a contrast color. I'm more comfortable working with it, even though it does have a little bit of a halo to it, but just something to consider. So this guide yarn needs to be like about 22 inches. I never usually measure it out. I kind of just eyeball it, and that's totally fine. You just want it to be long enough that you can flatten the strip out completely when you're done. So take the end of your guide yarn, feed it through the slip knot loop, just leaving it loose like it is, and then tie it to the top part of the frame. You will need to remove this later, so when I tie it, I do tie a double knot, but I make it really loose. That way I can easily pull it out when I'm finished with the strip. You'll just slide that over so it's close to the prong. Okay, then run it underneath. If you've got it sitting on a flat surface like this, run it underneath so it makes sort of a U shape there, and then tie the other end to the frame as well. Now I promise the stitching is really, really easy for a basic hairpin lace braid. The thing that you'll have to get used to and get comfortable with and kind of build up muscle memory for is how to hold everything. So we've got this loom now, and trust me, it's way more fiddly here at the very beginning than it is after you get, 5 or 6 stitches on your loom. So the first thing you want to do is make sure the slip knot is about roughly in the middle. So about there. And I'm going to pull on the tail just to tighten the knot a little bit. Since this is a slip knot, the more you pull on this, the more it's going to slide over. And the reason we put it in the middle is because we want the braid that sort of goes up the strip to be exactly in the middle. And it's really easy, especially when you're new and sort of figuring all of this out, to pull the slip knot over a little bit too much, and then your braid is just a little bit wonky at the beginning. Don't worry, it'll probably happen your first couple of strips, but just know that the way to fix that is to not hold so tight on the yarn as you're making the first 2 or 3 stitches. So what I typically do is run it over like this, come in with my left hand, and I will loop it around the loop. I'm just holding enough tension on this to keep everything steady, but not actually pull the slip knot anymore. Now remember, I told you it is a lot more fiddly with guide yarn at first, but just bear with me. This is something that you will want to use and get used to. So the guide yarn needs to be inside the loop. So as I have grabbed the working yarn here, I made sure that the guide yarn is just in between the loop now that this creates. Hold on to those two so you can get the yarn ready and in your hand. Now I will typically wrap it around my pinky twice because I really want to maintain a good steady tension on things, but do whatever's comfortable. However you like to hold your yarn, that is typically the best way to go. I'll still hold the yarn in my hand like I do if I'm crocheting regularly, sort of over my finger, but I just will hold on to the loom in the process. And again, I don't have so much tension on this that I'm pulling the slip knot, just enough that I can work. So you'll take your crochet hook and place it in the slip knot right up next to the knot, and you'll grab the working yarn, pull it through. Again, don't pull too tight on everything because you will slide that slip knot over, and then you'll just make a chain. So that's the first stitch of any basic braid. You'll always do that, but from here on out, it'll be just a little bit different. Now with everything in your hand like this, and I'm going to exaggerate this movement a little bit just so you can really see what's going on. You have your hook facing this direction, and it's in front of the loom, or closest to you. So you'll swing the hook around and do a 180. So it's basically just upside down, but it's on the same side of the loom. And then you'll slip it in through the middle. So now it's facing right side up like it was before, but it's on the back side of the loom. And I hold on to them with my pinky and my ring finger there as I flip the loom, and I'm turning it like the page of a book, if that helps you visualize a little bit. And I've got it there now all at the front of the work. And bear with me if you're like, whoa, this is weird. It really does feel very weird and very strange the first time. And you know what? It even looks fiddly when it's not weird and strange for the first time. I definitely don't look nearly as coordinated when I start out as after I have a few stitches. So look over here, you've got another loop there, and you'll place your hook through the loop. And I'm holding on to the tail yarn here because it just helps keep things steady and keep some tension on it. It just makes it a little bit easier for me to work with. So that's why I'm doing that. And I will grab the working yarn again, pull it through, and we're single crocheting. A single crochet is like all we do for this braid. So I'll yarn over and pull through 2. Now on this first real stitch of the braid, you still want to be gentle in how much you're pulling because you can still scoot that slip knot over just a little bit. So after you make your first single crochet, again, I'm exaggerating these motions. I've got my hook down facing upwards right now on the front side of the loom. I'll swing it around to do a 180. I'll flip it in through the middle and have it just like this. And then I will flip the loom over. Now I promise your guide yarn will get a lot more ruly, I guess, because it's unruly right now, after you have a few stitches attached to it. But it's a little bit of a pain right now, but it does make your life a lot easier. So now we have 2 loops on this side, we have 2 loops on this side, and we're always working over here if you're right-handed. If you're left-handed, you'll always be working over there, and it'll be a mirror image of what you're seeing. So you'll find the first loop, you'll insert your hook through it just like you did before, and single crochet. Now remember those exaggerated motions. Swing it around, slide it through, turn the loom, and you're ready to go. Find that next loop, make a single crochet, and there we go. Now at this point you can usually get a little bit more comfortable with holding everything because the slip knot won't move nearly as much, like I said, once you have a few stitches on there. And you'll also learn how the hook has to move. It's really easy to get confused by what the hook needs to do exactly, and so that's why I show you those exaggerated motions of, you know, starting here, rotating it around, flipping it through. But the reality is you don't necessarily have to do that in order to make it work. So when you finish your single crochet, my hook is usually right here, and I know that all I need to do is have my hook on the opposite side of the loom. So it's on the front side now, I need it on the back side. And so I won't necessarily start down here and rotate around because I already know how to do those motions. So I'll just take it where it already is, usually right here, and I'll just flip it in through the loom like that. And then turn the loom over, get the guide yarn out of the way, and keep going with the next stitch. So single crochet. Now I'll just pop it through the loom, flip it over, find the next loop, single crochet, rotate it and keep going. Now I will say, if you're trying to hold the work out in front of you like I am on a table, it's honestly probably not the best way to do it, because it does get a little bit fiddly to hold everything. I think you'll find that you'll be more comfortable if you have the loom sort of out in front of you. Maybe you can rest it on your chest or your stomach, or even on your lap, or you put a pillow on your lap. Find whatever position feels comfortable for you as you're working this. Now, I can usually do this sort of suspended and hanging in the air like that, but it does feel a little bit more fiddly for me personally. I do like to have the bottom part sort of resting on something, and I think that really does help quite a bit, but it's certainly possible to not have it steadied on any type of object or table or pillow or your lap or whatever. So one thing that's really, really common to see with the start of your braid, and you can even see it on mine, this is not my first 5th, 20th, 100th strip that I have ever created, and I always start over just a teeny bit from the center. And like I said before, it's just a result of how tight you're holding on to the yarn and how much you let that slip knot slide as you're making those first couple of stitches. But the good news is, if you're starting sort of close to the middle, maybe just a little bit off, it almost always works itself out to the middle. Now the braid will be a little bit crooked. It'll always stay that way if you start it this way, but don't let that completely discourage you. Don't let it make you want to start over and over and over and over until you get it exactly perfect in the center, because I mean, it's just really, really tough to get it centered exactly in the middle. And if you start and stop and start and stop over and over and over, you will hate this technique, and that's not what I want. It's not that difficult to, like I said, work it over sort of in the middle, like, you know, you want it to be after you have the first few stitches made. And you really, really can't see it all that much in your project. Now you will improve with time. You may see, like I said, just a little bit of a slight lean to it, and that's totally fine. Don't worry about it. Don't stress about it, and don't frog over and over and over until you get it perfect. Just get your first strip done and move on. Honestly, that's the best way to keep your sanity and still enjoy this technique. So you'll notice, of course, that you have loops on either side, so loops for each prong in your loom, and it's usually one off from one another because you're working the loop around one prong at a time. So if we count these, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. On this side. Now when I flip the hook over and I wrap the yarn around this prong, now that becomes my 9th stitch. And that's something to look out for, because typically your pattern will have you work a certain number of loops on each prong, and it typically matches from one prong to the next. So whenever you read a hairpin lace loom pattern, your instructions will tell you to crochet a basic braid, for example, which is exactly what we've done here, and it'll tell you how many loops you have. Typically, and you'll want to check your pattern notes because every now and then patterns can be a little bit different, but it's pretty standard for them to give the total number of loops. That includes both prongs. So for example, if you have a pattern that says work your basic braid for 200 loops. That's 100 loops on one side and 100 loops on the other side. So for this swatch, we're going to crochet 64 loops on each side. And that's another way to look at it. It's a little bit easier, I think, for me personally to wrap my head around. Obviously, working with nice round numbers, it's easy to divide in half. But, you know, for the sake of learning, for the sake of simplicity, you'll keep going with this strip until you have 64 loops on each side of the loom. But the written instructions for this swatch, for example, would say 128. That's 64 times 2. The good thing about this particular braid, the basic braid for hairpin lace, is that it's very repetitive. You're doing the exact same thing over and over. You're working with one stitch, just the single crochet. So that frees up your mind to find, better positions and better ways to hold the loom and hold the hook and hold the yarn. Like everything, practice will make it better, will make it neater, and will make it more comfortable. So I have this completed piece on my loom and I'm ready to take it off. Taking your work off of your loom is just as easy as, actually it's way easier than getting things started with, putting it all on the loom and getting the braid started initially. So first of all, I just remove my hook, leave myself a nice long loop there, and untie my guide yarns. There we go. Now I do like to pull the guides a little bit, just leave, a little bit of a loop here down at the end, and then I will tie this in a knot as well, just, leaving a little bit of space, depending on how much your work is sort of scrunched on the loom at once. You want the whole braid to be able to lay out and, be stretched out flat. So I just make sure I leave enough guide yarn that can happen. Fortunately, these strips are pretty small. They fit on the loom very well. So I kind of just stretch it out and I'll just leave a little bit of slack and then tie a double knot. Now this guide yarn, of course, will be removed in the joining process. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but it does need to be secure to keep those loops in check. Now what I like to do is fasten off just like any other crochet project. I've got a couple of different hook sizes here that I'm working with. I want to grab the right one. So I'll just pick that loop back up, leave myself a nice long tail, just like regular crochet, and then I'll just pull up on that loop. And now that stitch is nice and secure, and I can remove the top part, top little frame there, and just slide the braid off. You will want to do yourself a little favor and keep this tidy, keep it nice and even. It usually comes off of the loom really nice and tidy, and you'll be doing yourself a favor to keep it that way. So what I'll do is stretch it out, basically start at one edge and just roll it up. That way this is safe for storing while you're working on the other strips of the project, and it stays nice and tidy. And yeah, that's all there is to it. I've got 2 finished braids for this project so far, and I'll just keep them and store them like this until I'm ready to join them. Since hairpin lace is really great for garments and other wearables, knowing how to measure your gauge is one of those skills that's kind of a must, especially if you're following a pattern. So here I have just a little swatch here worked, just a small little braid to show you how to measure gauge. So the gauge on hairpin lace is typically measured in loops per inch or loops per 4 inches or 2 inches. You basically want to follow it just like you normally would any other gauge. But here's how you actually measure it. You'll want to place your ruler directly on the strip, matching it so you have like one loop directly on the 0 tick mark. And I really like this clear ruler for this. This is honestly just something I picked up in like the back to school aisle, but I love it for measuring gauge, even though it's broken over here, because it's see-through and it's really easy to actually see the loops and see the stitches through the ruler. So just a little Little tip there, if you're in the back to school aisle lately, pick up one of these clear rulers. So you'll go based off of whatever your pattern says. If it has number of loops in 4 inches, then you'll count however many loops are in 4 inches. Or if it's in 2 inches, you'll count 2 inches, but typically standard is in 4 inches. So we'll go ahead and count those. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and 32 loops in 4 inches. So if that's what your pattern said, then you'd be good to go starting on your actual strip using that same hook and yarn. If your gauge measures differently, just like with any of your other crochet patterns, you'll want to adjust your hook size in order to obtain that gauge, especially for wearables, something that needs to fit a specific way. Really, gauge is one of those things that you can't ignore. If you count fewer loops than what your gauge suggests in that particular measurement, then that means your stitches or your loops are bigger, which means even if you follow the pattern to a T for the size that you want to make, your stitches are bigger, therefore your strip will be bigger, and therefore the project will be bigger. And so the opposite is true if you count more loops in that 4 inches. Your stitches are smaller, your strip will be smaller, and your project will turn out smaller. So my general rule of thumb for matching gauge, if I'm off just a little bit, like maybe by 1 loop, possibly by 2 loops, then I'll just adjust by 1 hook size, not 1 millimeter size, but a hook size. So this one, I am using a 3.5 millimeter hook. If I needed to make my stitches a little bit bigger, then I would jump up to a 4 millimeter. Work the same strip and count again, or vice versa. If they were too big, I would drop down to maybe a 3.25 millimeter hook and make the swatch and measure again until I get it right. Now, all of this may be a little over your head for the practice swatch that we've been working on here, but gauge is really, really important for your success in finishing projects that fit the way you want to. So it's definitely worth putting a little bit of time and effort into making just a really small little gauge swatch when you do decide to follow a pattern. So I mentioned earlier that most hairpin lace patterns that you come across will have you work the basic hairpin lace braid, just what we've been working on so far. And the way patterns will typically differ from one another is in how they're joined. So I wanted to talk about a couple of different joins for hairpin lace. Obviously, this opens up a completely new can of worms. There are tons and tons of different joins that you can do, and that's how you can get so many interesting looks with hairpin lace. But I want to show you a couple of basics because I think it's the cool part of hairpin lace. So the first join I want to mention here is the first one that I learned how to crochet when I started hairpin lace. I think it's the easiest, but it's also one of the most interesting and unique to look at. So this one is called the cable join, and don't let the name frighten you. It's actually, I think, kind of easier than the single crochet join, which we'll talk about in a minute, which ironically feels like it should be the easiest. They're both really, really easy joins, and that's why I want to show them to you. But there's a couple of different things that you can do in addition to these joins that make them a little bit more interesting and unique. Now, there's a couple of different ways to get started with this. Basically, it's best to have it laid out in front of you, whether it be on your lap or on a pillow on your lap or a table like this in front of you. And you can either situate it so they're vertical like this, or if you find it more comfortable to work sort of at an angle or on the side, whatever works best for you. So for a basic cable join, you'll need to decide how many loops you want to work with at once. So I know I have a total of 64 loops in either of these strips. So I want to keep it with a number that divides evenly into 64, just so it all works out in the end. Now again, if you're following a pattern, or if you're following the written instructions specifically for this swatch that we're working on, you don't have to do any of this figuring, but in case you want to know how it all works, that's sort of my train of thought. So I'm going to work with four loops because 4 divides evenly into 64, and because I think it's a nice round number to give you a good pretty braid, not a super chunky and not like a really fine braid either. So what I will do is run my hook under 4 loops on one side, and then on the opposite I'll grab 4 loops, and you may find it easier to use a bigger crochet hook for this. A lot of times I will do that, or if you're comfortable, basically you want to take these 4 and pull them through the first 4, so we can sort of swivel it like this. And we'll work now with the opposite strip. So remember, these were the last 4 that I picked up, so I'll pick up 4 on this next one, and then I want to pull these through the 4 that's on my hook. Now you'll notice I'm leaving my guide yarn in place. I recommend that you do that throughout the join because these loops really do like to twist and turn in on themselves. And yeah, it just makes your life so much easier when you do it this way. So we picked up loops here. Now we're going to jump over to this strip. I will pick up 4, pull these through this one. And that's the repeat. You'll grab your 4 loops from one strip and then pull it through the other. Now some things you might run into with this join, of course, if you sort of get thrown off and you lose track, you may only have 3 loops, or maybe you'll have 5 loops pulled through. That's something to watch out for because that'll throw off your count in the long run. And then just maintaining a consistent tension as you're pulling. So I will typically pull it through, but then also kind of tug up on it a little bit so that the braid is sort of the same size throughout the entire join. And if you find it too fiddly to work with your smaller crochet hook, you know, the size that you crocheted the strip with, then just jump up to a bigger one. Whatever hook size will give you, you know, will make it comfortable. See, look, I totally just did one of the things that I said was easy to do. We missed a loop back there. So if you miss a loop like this, you can just walk it back. So we missed this one right here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's really, really simple to fix. So this is what a finished cable join can look like. There'll be some different variations of this depending on how many loops you use and that sort of thing. But generally speaking, a cable join will give you some kind of really pretty braid look to it. When it comes to joining a hairpin lace strip with a stitch like the single crochet, there's a couple different ways that you can go about doing it. And it's basically what you do with the loop before you work the stitch in it. So if you look here, the guide yarn has the loops in their sort of usual comfortable position. You can join the loops like that if you want, or you can introduce a single twist. So basically just twist it around once and add your stitch, or you can do a double twist. There we go. A double twist to work the stitch into. So it really just depends on your pattern or what look you're going for. Obviously, follow your pattern if that's what you have going on. But if you like to think about things outside of patterns, these are some of the things that you can consider with your joins to get a slightly different look. The other thing you can consider is adding groups of loops together. So let's say instead of working in one loop, I want to work with 2. Now you can hold them just in the same position. You can add one twist or you can do a double twist. So here I'd have just some scrap yarn to show you how you can potentially join these with a single crochet, but also know that you can like insert your own stitch to a certain degree. So once I make my slip knot, the next thing I like to do is put the strips together so that it's just a little bit easier to work with. You'll find the first loop on the bottom strip and the first loop on the top strip. You could insert your twists here if you wanted to do that, or just add your slip knot and pull it through, and you can chain one. Now I typically don't count my chains as a single crochet, so just to make it look a little bit neater, I'll go ahead and single crochet just through those same 2 loops, and then keep going. Pick up the loop on the bottom strip, or the one closest to you, and then the loop on the top strip, and single crochet, and keep going. This is really similar to, well, I mean, not really similar, but it feels similar to broomstick lace. If you're familiar with how to do that, you crochet in loops just like this with broomstick lace. So you can sort of take some of those same ideas and run with it. So specifically what I'm thinking of is maybe adding groups of loops together, maybe having a twist in them, and you can sort of mimic a similar look just like that. It gives it a little bit more of a texture, kind of like joining a granny square, you know, with the single crochet, you have a little bit more of a raised texture to it. And so that's kind of the look you get with just no twist, just very simple adding it together. So those are a couple of really basic joins with hairpin lace. Again, this is a topic that's really, really broad. There's so many things that you can do and incorporate into your projects, and is often what makes hairpin lace patterns unique from one another. So it is a topic that we could make several videos about. If you're interested in those, let me know in the comments, and I can certainly work on some of that as well. In addition to joins, we have edging, right? Because we have free loops on both sides of our strips, and once we join them together, inevitably we're going to have 2 ends that have these loops on either end. So there's a couple of things that you can do with those. First of all, you can leave the loops as is and make it serve as fringe. That's a really, really simple and easy way to not have to do much. The other really simple way to not have to do much is to take those loops and cut them and turn that edging into fringe. So those are 2 really, really simple options. And the other, of course, goes hand in hand with our joins. Remember, we had our cable join where we were feeding the loops in sort of one another and braiding it up the 2 strips as we go. We can do the exact same thing with our edging, just using a crochet hook. It's a little bit different, but basically the same. So if I were wanting to edge up this side using the cable edging method, just like we did before where I had 4, I'm going to turn this to the side just because it's easier for me to work into. I'll pick up 4 loops, and then I will pick up 4 more, and I will pull the first 4 into the last 4. And then pick up 4 more and feed those through. And you can just braid up the side of your project. So it looks just like the join before, sort of, but it just makes a nice, pretty, clean, sort of braided edge to your projects. So that's how you would do that. Of course, you can play around with the number of loops that's in your cable and, you know, customize it to your liking. The other thing, obviously, is using your regular crochet hook and just some regular crochet stitches. Of course, you can do a single crochet edging to match if you have a join that uses single crochet like you just saw before. You can incorporate twists in the loops as you add the stitches, but you can get even more interesting and involved. I've got a scarf pattern that I think is one of those projects it's a good starter hairpin lace project if you're wanting to take the next step. I'm working on another one that I think will be really fun and super easy, but this one is great to teach you not only one simple join, but also how to edge it with other stitches. So this particular pattern edges both sides of the sort of central braid for the scarf with the woven stitch. The woven stitch is one of my absolute favorite stitches of all times. It's slightly different in like muscle memory than like your usual crochet stitches, but it just is different enough that it's super cool and interesting. It keeps my mind engaged, and I just really like the texture of it. So that's what this particular pattern uses. I would recommend you follow along with that video if you want to see how to do that stitch. But basically, think about the things that you can do with your loops and let that guide your decision when you're playing around with your little swatch that you're working on here. Because again, you can do so much stuff with hairpin lace. So when you're edging with some kind of stitch pattern, again, you can introduce a single twist to your loop. You can do a double twist. Now I maybe wouldn't do that with this particular yarn just because this yarn has some twist already in it, so that twist sort of gets lost because of this yarn. But still something to consider. You can group two together, you can put a single twist and it makes it really kind of look like broomstick lace. If you add, you know, 2 or 3 of those, sort of twist it, and you can group and just add, you know, 3 or 4 stitches. I'm going to show you how to do that really quick. It's just super simple. Again, take your edging yarn, make a slip knot, and let's say, what are we using? We've got 4 loops here. I'll make a twist in them, place this on my hook, and then let's say I want to do 4 single crochets. This is almost exactly how I would do broomstick lace, by the way. 3 and 4. So we've got just a little group with some twists there. And then I would just pick up the next 4. Whoops. I'm using a crochet hook that's far too small for this join yarn that I'm playing around with. So there, that's what that would look like. Again, looks almost identical to broomstick lace. So that's one potential option, but that's generally how you would add a row of stitches to your edging. And you can do that to, you know, create, or I guess transition from hairpin lace to maybe traditional crochet by, you know, adding on to it, or you can just do 1 or 2 rows, just a simple border to edge your project. So as you can see, there is so much to this wonderful world of hairpin lace, and I hope this video did 2 things for you. I hope that it gave you a good introduction on how to get started if you want to get started, the tools that you need and the basic strip to work so that you can sort of get a feel for it, but also to motivate you to try this form of crochet. If you're in a position where you feel like you're kind of burnt out on your regular crochet hooks, you're looking for something completely different and unique, I'm telling you what, hairpin lace is the thing. It's so much fun. It's so different, but it's still crochet and it's still yarn, and you can just make some absolutely gorgeous projects with this technique. So it's definitely worth experimenting with for a little while if you need just a break from your regular crochet hooks. I do have a couple of beginner-friendly hairpin lace patterns available on my website for free, of course. I'll have those linked in the description below. I would encourage you to check those out and let me know if this is a topic that you want more videos on, because I would love to make them. I love hairpin lace projects, and I would love to go into more detail on different joins, different projects, different troubleshooting and tips and that sort of thing. So if you find that you love hairpin lace, or you have loved hairpin lace but you just can't find a lot of good information on it, let me know that in the comments too. That's really, really helpful for me to know so that I can organize more videos that will help you and that you're interested in watching. So yeah, let me know all of that in the comments below. Happy hooking, and I'll see you in the next one.